1,000,000, Benedict Cross declared, his voice sharp as a blade cutting through the brisk autumn breeze. That's the reward for anyone in this cursed place who can get that beast to sit calmly beside them for 5 full minutes. The crowd, gathered at the Hollow Creek livestock auction, shifted uneasily. Ranchers, breeders, and local spectators alike, all lured by stories of the German shepherd locked in a rusted kennel at the arena's edge. They turned from the growling dog to the man in the tailored coat. Cross's grin held no warmth. It didn't need to. His certainty, like his money, needed no validation. The dog, Ghost, as some had taken to calling him, didn't stop growling. His body, tense and scarred beneath a coat streaked with dirt, pressed against the steel mesh. He bared his teeth with each bark, eyes flashing not with fear, but with something more ancient. Betrayal. Cross laughed when the auctioneer paused. "Go on," he said, voice booming through the microphone. "Show off your champion. Let's see how far loyalty gets you without a leash or a stake." The handlers, 2 burly ranch hands used to wrestling livestock, approached with padded gloves and long poles. As they opened the gate, Ghost lunged, yanking against the rope tied to a post buried deep in the gravel. Dust rose. No one dared move closer. Not the cowboys, not the handlers, not even the so-called trainers scattered among the stands hoping to impress Cross. Unnoticed, a 12-year-old girl stood at the fringe of the arena, her hand curled around a worn harmonica in her pocket. Willow Hayes had no reason to be at a livestock auction and knew it. Her grandmother Miriam had only brought her because leaving her alone after school wasn't an option, and even then she'd complained about the crowd, the noise, the spectacle. But when Willow saw the German shepherd, she couldn't look away. The dog, pacing like a caged wild thing, sparked something in her. Not fear, not even rage, something hollow and buried, like the way grief lives in your bones long after you've pretended it's gone. "You hear that, girl?" Someone jeered. $1,000,000 just to sit by that hellhound. You could retire before high school." Willow didn't respond. She had already stepped forward, her sneakers soundless on the dusty ground. The murmurs in the crowd sharpened. Miriam called her name, but Willow didn't turn. Cross arched a brow as she approached. "What's this? A child stepping up? I figured a grown man would humiliate himself first." Willow remained silent. She didn't need to speak. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the harmonica, its metal edges worn, the initials EH barely visible on one side. Her mother's initials. The only thing left after the accident, after the fire, after her world had burned into memory. She raised the harmonica and began to play. It wasn't a song, not really, just a thread of notes drifting in the wind. Soft, unsure, but unmistakable. It wasn't polished, it wasn't loud, but it was safe. It was home. Ghost froze. The change wasn't immediate, but it was real. The dog, who had lunged at everything for days, now stood still. His growl faded. The rope slackened as he took a cautious step forward. Then another. Willow kept playing. The crowd held its breath. Ghost sat. It wasn't obedience. It wasn't submission. It was something far rarer. Trust. No one looked at a clock. Not even Cross, whose smug look had vanished, replaced by something harder to read. 5 minutes passed. No movement. No words. No applause. No cheers. The silence held the weight of something sacred. Even the auctioneer, a man trained to stir a crowd into bidding frenzies, couldn't find his voice. Ghost sat beside Willow, like he'd always been there. Her fingers clenched the harmonica, though she'd stopped playing. The quiet was louder than any note she'd played. Cross turned without comment and left. Willow stood, brushing the dust from her jeans, and reached for Ghost's collar. He didn't pull away. He rose and followed her, Not dragged, not ordered, chosen. Miriam stood at the gate, tears in her eyes. "We're taking him home," Willow said, her voice steady but heavy. "He doesn't belong here." And so they left. Girl, grandmother, and the dog no one could tame, walking down a gravel road toward the worn ranch on the edge of Sage Valley. Behind them, the auction faded into silence. The wind carried the final note from Willow's harmonica, like a promise, a beginning, something even Benedict Cross hadn't seen coming. "He doesn't walk," Willow told her grandmother the next morning. "He glides." She'd been at the kitchen window for nearly an hour, bare feet on cold linoleum, breath fogging the glass as dawn painted the pasture in silver frost. The dog, no longer a snarl of teeth and tension, moved along the fence, lying with deliberate grace, like the earth gave way to him. Miriam didn't answer. She joined Willow at the window, her eyes narrowing, understanding blooming quietly across her face. It was Willow who gave him the name. "Ghost," she whispered that afternoon, crouched by the tangle of brush at the back of the property where he liked to vanish in shadow. "Because you move like one, and your eyes see through people like they're already gone." He didn't react to the name, but he didn't reject it either. He paused, turned his pale eyes toward her, and blinked. It wasn't affection. It was recognition. Bringing him home didn't fix him. Ghost didn't suddenly trust the world. He wouldn't enter the house, avoided metal bowls, and flinched at sudden sounds. A slammed door sent him into a crouch so low he nearly disappeared. But he never snapped at Willow, never growled. He watched her, followed her from a distance, and at the end of the day he'd often be lying nearby, like proximity was his. Way of saying he was trying. His handlers, but they hesitated, uncertain whether to move or retreat. The crowd no longer watched the billionaire. All eyes were locked on the dogs, one lying in stillness, the other caught between aggression and awe. The moment hovered like held breath. Then it passed. The second German shepherd didn't lunge again. Instead, it exhaled, a long, trembling release of something old, fear perhaps, or memory. Ghost didn't move. He remained a presence, unmoving and solid, not threatening, but unwavering. It was not submission. It was peace, offered freely and without condition. Willow didn't speak. She didn't need to. The music had done what no command ever could. Around her, murmurs turned to silence once more, reverent and hushed. The handlers backed away slowly. One let the leash slip through his fingers, and the second dog didn't run. He stayed where Ghost stayed. Benedict Cross stepped forward, fury beneath the gleam of performance. "This is sentimentality masquerading as structure," he snapped, into the mic. "This is not how dogs are managed. This is chaos paraded as empathy. You're all being fooled." But no one clapped. Not this time. The crowd stood still, their earlier awe now laced with unease. One child, perched on a parent's shoulders, said softly, "That dog's not scared anymore." The whisper carried more truth than Cross's. Booming voice. Ghost rose slowly and walked back to Willow without glancing once at Benedict. The second dog stayed behind, not abandoned, but not yet ready to follow. Willow slipped the harmonica into her coat pocket and reached out a hand. Ghost brushed against her fingers and looked up. They walked out together, again without instruction or restraint. No one tried to stop them, not even Cross. The man stood beneath the glare of the lights, jaw clenched, mic still in hand, but the script had unraveled. He had no more lines that mattered. Back at the Hayes Ranch, dusk settled like a blanket across the hills. The porch light buzzed with early moths. Inside, Miriam stirred a pot of stew while Willow sat at the old table with Emma's journal open. Ghost lay curled beneath the bench, his breathing slow and steady. Miriam didn't ask what had happened. She didn't need to. She poured 2 mugs of tea, chamomile for herself, warm milk for Willow, and placed them on the table. "Was it worth it?" she asked after a time. Willow nodded once. "It wasn't about winning." Outside, a rustling near the barn drew Ghost's attention. He rose, stretched, and moved to the door without sound. Willow followed. When she stepped out onto the porch, she froze. The second shepherd stood at the gate. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just waited. Ghost padded forward, passed through the open gate, and circled once before lying beside him. It was not an invitation. It was an acceptance. Willow opened the gate further and stepped aside. The second dog moved slowly, eyes darting, posture wary but not defiant. When he passed into the yard, he paused, glancing toward her only once. She didn't approach. She just sat on the step and waited. Behind her, Miriam watched through the screen door, tears she didn't entirely understand blurring her vision. Ghost had come home a ghost, and now another followed. In the weeks that followed, the second shepherd, whom Willow began calling Echo, stayed close to Ghost, trailing behind him like a second shadow. He flinched at loud noises, didn't eat when watched, and spent hours staring at corners like he was waiting for something to jump out. But he didn't snap. He didn't bite. He just endured. And Willow, patient and quiet, let him. She read more of her mother's journals, now weathered with dog-eared pages and scribbled notes of her own. Trust doesn't ask for performance. One entry read, "It waits through the silence and believes that something will bloom." Clara. Monroe continued to visit, offering no advice unless asked, but watching with the slow smile of someone who's seen time do its work. She brought treats and books, left with dirt on her jeans and stories to tell other farmers. Cross, meanwhile, faded from the public eye, retreating into luxury homes and executive boardrooms. The footage from the fair circulated, first as gossip, then as something quieter, a curiosity, a moment people couldn't explain but couldn't dismiss either. He tried to bury it with press releases, new sponsorships, and exhibitions of precision-trained dogs. But none of it erased the image burned into public consciousness of a child walking beside a creature that once inspired fear, held together not by obedience, but by understanding. Willow didn't speak to reporters. She turned away every camera. She didn't want to be a symbol. She only wanted to give Ghost, and now Echo, a life worth choosing every day. She still carried the harmonica. Some days she played it. Most days, she didn't need to. By winter, Echo had taken to sleeping inside the barn, his body curled in the straw beside Ghost's. He'd eat when Willow sat nearby, would sit if she crouched beside him, and on one morning, without prompting, he let her touch his head. That evening, Willow returned to the tree where Ghost had first rested, journal in hand. She read the final line from a page her mother had marked with a flower petal, long dried and faded. "The fiercest animals don't need taming, they need remembering." She closed the book and looked toward the barn, where the dogs lay, quiet beneath the rafters. Snow had begun to fall, soft and slow, blanketing the world in silence. And in that stillness, in that quiet, something healed.